Great episode for you today. We're going to talk about player growth first, especially looking at the countries that have just received their localized versions. Then we're going to talk about the RTN season, which has, of course, just kicked off. Talk a bit about the meta. We're going to talk a bit about Uprising, reception, launch, and design. It's going to be really great. All right, so first topic we have of the day. How many people are actually playing Flesh and Blood, right? Very easy for people to see how many people are playing Flesh and Blood. You just go to Fab TCG, you go to Lifetime, you can see how many people have tried Flesh and Blood at an official tournament. You go to 90 Day, you can see how many people have played it at, a local tournament. Usually the metric that, companies apply, I think, is like 10 times. So it's 10 times the number of people who have played in a tournament have actually played your game. It's always tricky to understand how that actually applies, but if you talk about like how many, but if you look at the sort of this figure, if you ask how many people played Magic the Gathering, the answer is 35 million or something like that. That is not a number that is based on actual people with a DCI number who showed up to tournaments. That is based on a calculation based on Wizards will have an average number of boosters per player, and then they'll basically try and work that out in terms of how many people are likely to game. Once you get print runs for a set, you can potentially figure out sort of how many people they are printing the game for. You do like an average of like 2 boosters boxes per person, which seems low, but you have to realize most people aren't buying cases. They're not buying lots of boosters. Some of the people we know are, but not everyone is, and it's kind of important to understand that. But the only other metric we really have is just actual lifetime player growth. So let's have a look at that. I have taken the time to sit down and build a lovely spreadsheet. I feel like a lot of people, especially in the Flesh and Blood community, forget that so I'm an analyst, so I actually build spreadsheets for a living. So doing this sort of number work is fairly good for me. It's fairly straightforward. So it's fairly easy. I mean, we're just taking the number of people on lifetime XP on specific dates. We're taking the number of people on 90-day XP on specific dates, and we're just seeing what the trends show us and what the trends show us in terms of a couple of things. So let's start off with lifetime XP. We've obviously got, when I last tracked this in May, we had 28,500 players. Now that we're tracking it in July, we have 31,000 players. So I'm working out a growth rate on that. It was basically just the growth rate for the 1.5 months was 9 point something. So the growth rate for a month is about 6.5. And then we're moving on from that to basically ask a question about how much. Oh, that didn't work. Making my camera act up. Sorry, everyone. Let's see if we can't fix that. Okay, cool. So, we're taking that calculation and we're basically saying, okay, if the game is growing by 6.5% a month, right? Which is how much it's grown in the last period that we're talking about, then what does that mean in terms of player growth over the next while? Okay. And assumedly, if it keeps growing at that rate every month, 6%, it's going to grow on average, quite, a fair bit. It's going to double every year if it keeps growing 6% a month. Just because of well, not double, but get close to doubling, just because that will be roughly about 60% growth a year. And if it keeps doing that, there is actually quite a good trajectory for the game. If we think about 2025, they'll be on 179,000 players. 2022, they'll be on 322,000 players. But then once you start getting to larger numbers, obviously the growth rate is supposed to basically become exponential, where, this is how companies calculate growth rate, at least, is based on these growth curves, right? Where we have this figure, but of course, as the baseline figure increases, the growth then of the product beyond that does also start to increase rapidly as well, which then of course gives us the answer of when will Flesh and Blood get its first million competitive players, and that will be by 2032, which might not be pleasing to a lot of people to hear, but if we get to that point, the tournaments will be huge, the people will be having a great time, and we're going to have a really good experience with the game. If the game lasts that long, this is kind of an important question and discussion to have, right? So, how does that work then? And this is important, right? So, if you're calculating the growth of a product that fills a specific need, and you can calculate the need of the market. So, I know I'm going to lose a few people already who aren't really here for like market sizing and segmentation discussions. But if that is, I'll be putting the timestamps for the RTN section in the channel, and you can skip straight to that, so that's okay. And the first thing you do when you're calculating customer segment and market size is you scroll down the YouTube page and you hit subscribe, and that tells me that you've been listening, and therefore you want me to continue with this sort of discussion. No, the first thing you do is you attempt to calculate something called a total addressable market, or a TAM. A TAM is essentially everyone in a country, region, market, business, industry, whatever, who you think wants a product like yours, right? So if I'm selling hair dryers to women, I can make the bold claim and say, 60% of women have hair, therefore 60% of women are a target customer for a hairdryer, right? But if I'm doing something like business, it'll be something like, well, my product is only suitable for companies with over 10 employees. I can get the government statistics that tell me there are, 500,000 companies with over 10 employees in the United States. That means that my total addressable market, if my product is suitable for every company with over 10 employees, is 500,000. If there are a few other caveats we have to add on there, like kind of, only companies over 10 sizes that are based in metropolitan areas. So if I'm a metropolitan waste paper collection business, then suddenly I have to find out how many businesses there are in metropolitan areas, and suddenly we're sizing a market. So the market for a game like Flesh and Blood is very, very difficult to size because, as you might imagine, we are trying to establish a base of people who are A, interested in TCGs, B, willing to spend on TCGs, and C, interested in the environment and the area of Flesh and Blood. So we could say that the total addressable market for a game like Flesh and Blood is everyone who ever played Magic the Gathering. 35 million players of Magic the Gathering. Currently, that could be a total addressable market for Flesh and Blood, right? If that is the TAM for Flesh and Blood, we are obviously 0.001% of that at the moment on 31,000. Though we don't know how many people we have playing the game outside of this because we don't have an online platform. That will be a number that LSS has. That's a number that obviously is guiding their print runs, which means that when we get print runs for the latest sets, Everfest and Uprising, we're going to have a better understanding of how many people they're printing the game for. But at a very basic understanding, we're talking about market growth in terms of the number of people that you can sell a product to and the amount of growth. Now, TCGs are a bit interesting in this regard because if you look into them, they don't behave. And this is the reason I was talking about TAM, is that when you're calculating growth rates based on a product that fills a specific need, and that need is shared by a certain percentage of a business population, you can then assume a steady growth rate on the product as long as the growth rate doesn't exceed the total addressable market, right? So if my total addressable market is 6 billion, and my growth rate says that if I'm going to go up 50% this year, 50% next year, and that's going to put me on 12 billion, obviously I've capped my TAM, so I can't actually gain that 12 billion because those customers don't exist, right? There's a reason I'm saying this, because that's in a case where we're talking about you identify demographic size. So we could say for Flesh and Blood it's 35 million. I'm happy with that. And then you identify a need, right? And when you're filling that need, you can assume a certain number of people are going to have the same need over and over again. Now, the problem we have with Flesh and Blood is that it's not a need-based product. It's a luxury-based product. And it operates in a situation of a distribution network, which means that not everyone is getting it in the same way, in the same capacity. It's not filling a need in the sense that, another 20 people aren't going to wake up every single day and say, I need Flesh and Blood. Whereas if you were selling something like medication or something like that, you could calculate the number of people who are going to get a specific disease every month, and therefore you can calculate the growth rate of your total addressable market every month, and that gives you a guideline for capping your growth rates, right? That's what I'm trying to say when I'm talking about the 6.59%, is that there are lots of things that kind of weirdly impact TCG growth because it is a luxury product for it's a non-need based product for a specific target group, right? And that means that really what actually affects growth is things like when an LGS starts selling it, you might get 20 players. It also means that like the growth comes in stages and waves based on large mass adoption, and it is a very social product, which means that the waves are based on large mass adoption. So if lots of people in a country start playing it, more people in a country will start playing it. One of the reasons we're discussing this today is obviously the French, German, Italian, and Spanish versions of the game have just come out, so we are expecting a large surge in players in that market, which is something that I want to capture. And I want to come back to the growth rates in those markets in say 3 months time, maybe next month, and see how this has changed, right? And obviously even the 6.59% isn't ideal because I only have 2 data points. Once I've updated this on the 3rd of August, the 3rd of September or October, if that 6.9% stays current, then we have a baseline growth rate per month, and then we can work out a baseline growth rate per annum, which will be far more accurate than this baseline growth rate. If it is like 60%, that is really high, so I'm not sure if I believe it, but we'll have to sort of see where we end up. And obviously we are talking as well about a game and a situation where we can have plateaus, right? So obviously, for those of you who are still following, and sorry if this isn't your trend, steady growth is a calculation of, and again, we come back to steady growth being a calculation of the market that needs your product also growing alongside your product, right? Or you're not hitting that cap of the TAM, right? But it also implies that there's always going to be people searching out your product, buying your product, who need to get it because it is a need that they have to find. So it's a guaranteed purchase as long as you can tell them about your product in a certain way, right? Now with Flesh and Blood, we have the problem of basically there are a certain number of people in any country who will happily play Flesh and Blood as a product. That growth is based on how many of those people have social connections to the people currently playing the game. That means that if you reach a saturation on specific LGSs that you service, so they're hosting an armory every week with 20 people coming, maybe occasionally they get an extra player who knows someone, but they can only host 20, 30 people at their LGS, so they can't grow it more. They're not really going to be growing that community that much, right? And then you're going to hit the plateau. So if every LGS that ever picks up Flesh and Blood in the UK, for example, has picked up Flesh and Blood, the growth rate should actually plateau. It shouldn't keep growing at a steady pace, right? Unless you add more LGSs to the network, because the LGS actually doesn't really change size all that much, okay? And that sounds a bit crazy, but if 60 people were playing Flesh and Blood regularly in London near me, would my LGS expand from 30 seats to play Flesh and Blood to 60? No, because the other 30 seats it sells to West Ham fans who are drinking heavily. Like, the point is that there is they probably would for specific occasions, and they'd be really happy because we're on an off night, so any number of Flesh and Blood players that came in would be welcome. So I'm not burning my LGS by saying that. I'm saying that like there are factors that limit LGS size beyond how popular one specific game is, right? It's just a factor. So if all the LGSs in London started playing Flesh and Blood and had their max capacity, then the game would be really good, but there would still be an upwards limit. So we're talking about a situation where growth is likely potentially not to be sustained. It is likely to plateau unless more LGSs come on board, but there is still a cap of LGSs. What I'm trying to do with this segment is just trying to give a bit of a groundwork for market dynamics in this specific game based on what we can see on the numbers, and also like how that indicates and implicates various changes that we're going to expect to see in terms of like ongoing growth, and how that growth could not might reflect this, but also could also not reflect this very easily, right? I think if I told you there's going to be 1 million Flesh and Blood players within 6 years time, you might be like, okay, the game's doing really well, and it is for now. But I think the only way you get accurate data for this sort of game is if you track it over a couple of years. So this is a loose projection, but I want to just follow through with that. The other thing, of course, we're looking at is, of course, lifetime XP growth per player. So the number of players who are playing the game or have tried the game and how much that's increasing. You can see some healthy percentages. Ignore the ones where it goes from like 17 to 20 and has a 35% growth. That's an aberration. It's not really like a huge sample size, so the growth rate's obviously going to be higher. But you can see some pretty solid growth in markets like Canada, Australia. You can see some pretty healthy growth in... Oh, sorry, you can't see the countries. Let me move this over. That's me playing League of Legends. Ba, 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 ba. Let me select. Back. One second. All right, settings restored. So, if you see here down the left, obviously we've got these countries, and you can see, you know, Argentina 7%, Belgium nice 16%, you know, Canada 11%, Germany 17%. We're expecting that to go up. Spain 17%. You know, UK 10%. You know, let's not talk about Iceland. some of them are always bad. New Zealand gained 5%, but then this is kind of an example of what I'm talking about. Like, a lot of people who are in proximity to the New Zealand flesh and blood community have tried the game, which is why that has 5% growth. Whereas somewhere like Spain and Germany, we're seeing much larger growth because a lot more people are trying the game. New Zealand's also a smaller market. A lot of people are like, why isn't Worlds in New Zealand? You know, all these kind of things. We'll talk about why in a second. It should become pretty obvious as we slide down this screen, right? Down here in the USA, largest market in the game, right? This is why Worlds is in the US. It has 13,000 players compared to, you know, a tenth of that in any other market, including New Zealand. Still seeing 9% growth, right? Now, this is the sort of thing where we can just pretty quickly... Yeah, so if we want to, we can quickly plot a growth rate chart. If we're assuming the US is increasing by 9% a month, this should probably be thirded, though, because we want to calculate rates. Based on... So remember, because this growth rate, as we said before, is 1.5 months rather than 1 month. So actually, if we wanted to calculate growth rate for the US, it would probably actually just have to be 6, because that way it's actually... You know, so 0.6 growth, you know, if we're assuming 0.6 growth across the board, then, you know, we're looking at a situation where 900 players get added, 1,000 players get added, another 1,000 get added, 1,400 get added. You know, and then by the end of the year, if we extrapolate this out to like December, you know, we start to, you know, you start to see pretty solid growth in terms of the game. But my point still stands from before, which is that you can't necessarily guarantee that there aren't going to be plateaus and things like that. That's why you kind of need more historical data. You can't see this. Sorry, this is my projection, right? So if we're looking at this projection, it kind of makes sense. Also, my eyes keep looking off to the side, is that I have to look at the view to make sure you guys can have the view. Anyway, so my point is, like, by next February, if we've got 24,000 players, then the growth rate's accurate, but I don't believe we'll have that. I just believe that this is a good indication of, you know, where the game is going. It is still on an upwards trajectory. There are very few countries which actually have lost... well, no one has lost lifetime players, obviously, but if we go on to the 90-day experience chart, there are very few companies that have actually fallen down, which shows that, at least for now, in every country, mostly, bar a few, the number of players who are coming in to replace the ones that are leaving is still, like, superior to the numbers that are leaving, okay? And that's kind of important. The most interesting fact, so, I mean, if we look at just 90 days, that's quite interesting. So we see 1,700 extra people are playing now a month and a half afterwards, later. So in a month and a half, we've gained 1,000 players. And remember, you know, exponential growth is a specific thing, but in this particular case, we're talking about non-exponential growth, but it is growth that does scale, because the more people that are talking about the game and telling people about the game, the more the, you know, player base does actually grow. But I think the most interesting thing I'm going to be tracking ongoing on the spreadsheet is the percentage of 90-day people who have played in the last 90 days. So the percentage of lifetime who have played in the last 90 days. Because this is the most interesting number, I think, to keep track of. Because this shows us kind of pretty healthily whether the game is growing both in lifetime but also in number of people registered and playing on Gem. So if we keep tracking this number, and I mean, in some ways, it is a losing battle because lifetime is always going to go up and it's always going to include a large number of people. But the real question we have is how healthy is the game? How many people are picking Flesh and Blood and can't put it down versus how many people are picking up Flesh and Blood and quitting? So I think this is where the number gets kind of interesting. Anyway, this is what I want to talk to you about. I think Flesh and Blood is in a very strong growth pattern. This was prompted, I should say, the reason this was prompted. The reason this was prompted is that I was watching one of Kitchen Table TCG's recent videos where he had a guy called the Magic Historian on, and that guy was basically talking about what it takes to grow and break into the top four market. And he said that basically, unless you had a player base. Unless your game was as popular as Pokemon when it launched in terms of IP, you were never going to break into the top four in terms of globally played TCGs. Now, I actually think that's a very true statement, and I think that is a reminder of everyone to be cautious about where we are in the growth journey of Flesh and Blood, which is one of the reasons why I wanted to show those numbers, is that I have played niche card games. I've played LCGs. I've played things like that, where the global community of competitive players was about 5,000. The global community of other players was about 15, 20,000. And, you're talking about a game, that lasts for 5 or 6 years and then goes away, right? Now, for games to get past that 5 or 6 year mark, is like that big sort of milestone, right? And Flesh and Blood, we're now at about 2 to 3 years in most parts of the world. So we are coming up on that 5-year milestone. And I think it's very important to address the fact the game has a lot of work still to do, right? Even if we have 30,000, I think we said we had 15,000 active tournament players who have played the game in a tournament in the last 90 days. The majority of people on that list do not have like 200 XP. They have they have like 2 or 3, which means they've been to one armory. We still have a lot of work to do to secure those players long term. There's still a lot of work to do to get those people on board long term with the game and also believing in the game. Now, why is this relevant? Okay, a lot of people still talk about making a full Flesh and Blood collection, getting all the cold foils. A lot of people still talk about Flesh and Blood as an investment thing. And I think if the past 2 years have done a lot to dissuade people about that idea, it's not to say that your cards won't have value for the length of the lifespan of the game, right? And as long as the game keeps going and the classes are legal, your Grasp of the Arknight should be worth around 80 to 100 euro, right? But, as someone who's played a lot of dead games, the value doesn't necessarily stay if the game dies, right? So, the reason that you'll get people from the Magic community saying that Flesh and Blood isn't an investment, it's a perfectly fair critique. Until the game has lasted for 10 years, is it going to last for 10 years? No one knows. So we're in a very tricky situation of understanding longevity. Now, personally, I think Flesh and Blood has the tools to build itself into a big game. If it didn't, I wouldn't be supporting it. In terms of, this is most important, the community is inclusive and vibrant. That's very important for a modern game to thrive. You need to attract people who are not so deeply involved in Magic, are on the peripheries of the LGS, who are looking for or attracted by the lore and find a welcoming community that they can walk into and feel comfortable part of. That's incredibly important. You're not going to get someone into the game, with a few exceptions, who's got like 10 grand in Magic because they want to play Magic. They're going to play Magic. Magic is what they have the brain for, because you don't suddenly stop playing rugby and start playing cricket. Well, maybe you can, but most people don't. So the point is, like, you have to think about this in terms of what do we need to do? We need to be more welcoming, get more players involved in the game, and we need to get that growth rate and keep it up, keep people playing, keep people invested, right? Fab 2.0 has been really, really good for this in some ways, because the availability of cold foils and rainbow foils in the same way, which is something I want to do a proper discussion on soon, has led to a lot of cross-tier trading where I, casual player who's not collecting the game, gets a cold foil that I can then trade for rainbow foils. I traded 2 of my cold foil legendaries for a rainbow foil of the same and a rainbow foil fabled, and I was really happy with that trade because if the fable is good, I now have a copy to play. I don't need the cold foils as long as I replace them with the equivalent rainbow foil card, right? And maybe I want some of the cold foils because they look really nice and I have all the cold foil dragons, but I'm not, so keen on cold foil Alluvian Constellus, for example, or anything like that. So, there are lots of elements going on there in terms of the market and forces that are keeping Flesh and Blood up, at least for the moment, right? But sustained growth is what is needed to maintain that, and as well as coherent design. So I mean, the key point of all of this to take away is I wanted to show you the growth rates for the game, where we are, and the fact that we still have a very very long way to go. Kind of responding to this idea that Flesh and Blood can't be one of the top 4 TCGs. It could, but like if it is, it's gonna be the long, slow road to get there. It's not, oh, free tendies, this is the best game, everyone has to play it. It's consistent, good communication, run large events, get more people to those events, avoid player friction, things that make people leave, keep the game fun, keep designing good game mechanics, and make sure that people's interactions with the Flesh and Blood community are positive as well, right? And that's kind of a bit for LSS to do, a bit for all of us to do. It's not just a one person responsibility. You are responsible for your local community being welcoming to new players, and to be fair, you are responsible for those new players coming back. LSS is responsible for the players who I know that didn't come back because stores were allowed to charge $35 or pounds for a pre-release, which only had, £20 worth of booster packs in, and then didn't offer any additional pricing, right, or anything like that. And I'm not saying that's the wrong or the right approach. I mean, stores cost a lot of money to run. You're giving people your store for a whole day to run a pre-release. That's a big deal. But the point is more just, we're talking about player perception. A couple of people said to me, I'm not going to any more pre-releases because I feel they're too expensive. I don't get enough back from them. Whether or not I disagree with those people, that's not the point, right? That's not the point. You get what I'm trying to say. That's not the point I'm talking about. I'm talking about the fact that they feel that way and how that needs to be addressed by the community, because the community has to make the environment welcoming, the game welcoming. For that very same reason, because I TO my local armories, I just put the schedule up and run them. 2 of our 4 events a month are commoner draft, right? Because I can say to new players, come to the draft, it'll be casual. Come to commoner, build whatever you want, especially with the belittle and chain lightning bands, which are very good. And those people will feel welcome. So we can get to that point where they are feeling welcome and they're there, right? So moving on quickly, because we talked about this for a long time, just in terms of player growth, and I think I've addressed it well. Anyone who found the segment interesting, I can talk about this stuff quite a lot. I mean, again, I think you guys don't realize, because I am a business analyst, so I do know a lot about like growth rates and TAMs and markets and things like that. I don't want to do that too much with Flesh and Blood because I don't view it personally as an investment opportunity. I view it as a game. I look at it saying, how much am I putting in per year? What am I getting out of that in terms of friends, interactions, trips to the pub, trips overseas, fun experiences, right? And if I'm putting 3 or 4 grand into the game every year and I'm getting back, plus the YouTube channel, 20 hours or 30 hours a week of enjoyment, then that's, I don't know what that, let's bring up the calculator. I want to know what that answer is. But, if we work out that I'm spending, say, 4 grand on the game and I'm putting in, say, 20 hours minimum a week, just talking about the game, chatting about the game, that sort of thing. So that's by 52. That's 1,000 hours. That means that I'm spending roughly £4 an hour on Flesh and Blood. I mean, how much do you spend on League? How much is a WoW subscription? Like, these things all add up to something. It's on the expensive end of hobbies, but I'm not like particularly that fussed by it. And the thing is that one of the things I like about TCGs is that they are a force multiplier. So, not a force multiplier, they are a cost multiplier. So I could easily, and sometimes with the channel I could spend 40 hours a week on Flesh and Blood. And if that's 40 hours, then that's not that number. Come on, calculate. Please behave. Then that's roughly £2 an hour, right? So, we're talking about something where I can invest a lot more time and lead to events, and I'm basically getting more money back every time I spend more time playing the game. So that's how I view the game. I don't view it as I've got a card collection worth this much, because as we've seen, the cards, the rainbow foil legendaries are quite liquid, but if I sell those, I can't play the game. The cold foils are not that liquid, and obviously if I sell them, I'm not necessarily going to get back what I paid for them if they were in Monarch or anything like that. And there is a little bit of me that's willing to say put £1,000 worth of cold foils in a box and see if the game makes it to year 10, right? But that's the see if the game makes it to year 10, not this is going to be worth this much money in 10 years. I'm taking a gamble because I have that £1,000 spare that isn't part of my overall safe pension ISA concrete saving pattern, right? If you're in a situation where you are not saving money in an ISA, or that's an investment stocks account in the UK, you get £21,000 tax-free savings to invest if you're in the UK. If you are under the age of 40 and you are not investing in a lifetime ISA, which gives you you're allowed to put in £4,000 a year. The government will give you £1,000 if you put in £4,000. You literally get 25% for free. You can only take it out to buy your first house or to retire, but equally you're getting £1,000 for free. Like, if you're not doing all of that stuff and you're buying cold foil cardboard, you should be doing all that stuff before you buy cold foil cardboard, right? Anyway, that's PSA. Let's talk about RTNs now, because I realize that segment's gone on a bit long, and I would like to talk about RTNs because that is the main topic of the week. My feedback on RTNs is adding draft to RTNs. Huge thumbs up. I cannot wait to do a draft RTN. I found Uprising to be a very, very good draft set. We're going to be doing a video on draft strategy soon. The Patreons have already got an initial draft guide. It will get, refined as things go on. I do have a Patreon, by the way. There are people there. We have a Discord. You can join the Discord without being a Patreon. Just come in and talk if you want to. If you're on a Patreon, you are going to get my initial thoughts on Limited. You're going to get my draft notes. You're going to get my deck when I'm happy with it. You're going to get a lot of stuff from me as things go by. At the moment, though, of course, if you subscribe before the end of next month, I still have a load of Heralds of Rebirth. So those are going out to Patreons who subscribe. The ones who were subscribed at the end of June will all be getting theirs. And of course, any new Patreons will get some too. Those are still there to be given out. So RTNs, I've played 2 so far. I top 8'd one. I went 0-2 and dropped out of the other one just because I was having a bad day. I played Dromai in both of them. I think Dromai is quite interesting. I want to explore the space that happens. I know a lot of people think of me as a ninja player, and I do enjoy playing ninja. And I will be playing Katsu at some point again in the future because I think he's got a lot of really good tools. But as it was, Dromai was the most interesting hero from Uprising from what I've seen. So I just wanted to play Dromai and see what her capabilities were. This morning, which is the RTN I played, the second one where I dropped out after going 0-2, I just wasn't really feeling it. I was making tons of mistakes in terms of blocking and everything, and I was just like, I'm just losing. I'm losing because I'm not playing Optimi. I'm not losing because the deck was bad. I tuned it after last night. I was losing because, like, for example, I had Ghostly Touch on the table. 7 of my things got popped, and I just didn't notice, and I just didn't tick it up. My first time playing with the card, but even so, like, I'm a better player than that, which is one of the reasons I dropped from the tournament rather than just keeping playing. I wasn't having a good time. So there is a problem with RTNs, right? This is the core part of this segment. There is a problem with RTNs because we've had the first weekend of RTNs, and based on feedback I've heard from other events, people are not playing top cuts, right? It sounds a bit silly, but because you think people want ELO. ELO doesn't matter to a lot of people right now. People obviously want the prestige. People want living legend points. I'm here to tell you that people don't care about ELO until there's an event where ELO matters. It's not on the front of their mind. I'm here to tell you that the living legend points thing, they don't care. They just want it to sort itself out. And I'm here to tell you that the pricing is not good enough to get. No, it's not that the pricing isn't good enough, right? Let's point out the cold foil heroes are really nice. I've got a Dromai one here, so I don't want people to leave this thinking I'm saying the pricing is bad. The cold foil heroes are really, really nice. The problem is the prize gradient between top 8 and top 2, top 4 first place isn't good enough, right? So the Icelander is not sufficiently more desirable than the other 7 cold foil heroes to make people care enough to be the one who wins it. Especially given that we have 2 other cold foil Icelanders already, and one of those is like a full art Marvel. So the people who really like Icelander are kind of spoiled for choice. And a lot of them do like Steve Argyle's art. If you really liked Icelander, you're dropping 100 quid, you're getting that double-sided EA Icelander gorgeous one. And I have my own, because I'm quite fond of Icelander, and because I met Steve, I thought let's get him to change it. Oh, it's probably in my box, but I have my own, altered Icelander that Steve Argyle did. So, the point is, like, people who like Icelander are spoiled for choice. I have heard of multiple RTNs now where people have got to the top 8, shuffled up the pile of cold foil heroes, and rolled the dice to see who got the Icelander and just called it a day. I have seen top 8s where a lot of people get to the top 4 and then immediately drop because they've got their or concede because they've got their nationals invite. They don't care about Icelander, and the top 4s aren't going to be played. There's a few things going on here. Some of the RTNs are starting quite late, like 12 p.m. is too late to start an RTN. People are starting at 12, and you're not even finishing the Swiss until like 6 p.m. It's really, really, really way too late. You need to start at a healthier time. You need to start at like 10 or 11. Give people enough time to get there, but like you have to start early to finish the event on time. And it doesn't really matter, if a few people aren't there. You have to get the event done. You can't just be waiting there for certain people to show. Like you can't just start at 10 because you need to get it. You can't just start at 12. You need to get it over with. There are a few problems. RTN starting and finishing too late has put a lot of people off playing top 4s. But the main thing really is the gradient in prizing. The real prize at an RTN is top 4, so you get the invite to a nationals. Unless the first place and the finalists, so first and second, have a significantly better prize than the cold foil hero you get for making top 8, people aren't playing those finals. They're just working it out, right? And I know, right, back to this, the rules that LSS have given us say you cannot determine the winner of a match any other way. You cannot decide who wins the top 8 by, rolling a dice. You cannot do any of these things. And I guarantee you, in rooms all over the country, all over the map, people are doing it because they don't want to spend, like, Flesh and Blood is a great game, right? Everyone knows it is. It's a really good game. We really all enjoy playing it. I obviously love playing it and talking about it. But if you've just spent 6 hours playing Flesh and Blood, made it to the top 8, maybe you play one more game, you make it to the top 4, you spent 7 hours playing Flesh and Blood, the tournament started at 12 o'clock, it's now 7 p.m, 7:30 after deck checks have been added in, maybe you had a lunch break, maybe it's 8 o'clock. The majority of people at that event now want to go home, right? So the only solution to this is to start the event earlier, because if it's 6 o'clock, the majority of people don't want to go home. They're happy to play another game or two of Flesh and Blood. People like playing the game, but if tournaments are going to start late and finish late, and if there isn't a suitable incentive to spend an hour more at that venue to get a better prize, you're going to just take the easy journey home, right? You're going to get home before 10 o'clock, you're going to have some dinner, you're going to get home early enough to say goodnight to your kids or to get ready for work the next day if it's happening on Sunday. You're going to get home early enough to take the trash out, take your dog for a walk. Like, all of these things you can do, if you leave at 6 instead of leaving at 8 p.m. at night, right? If you get home at 10 p.m., you're not taking your dog out for a walk. If you live in a dodgy neighborhood, if you get home at 10 p.m., you're not changing your sheets or doing the laundry or cleaning the floor or hoovering or any chores of the weekend. You're automatically, if you're eating at 10 o'clock, not going to sleep as well that night. Like, there's all these compound things to do with the events running late, but also just the lack of incentive to play, right? So I would say this to LSS, and I think it's being perfectly fair, is that obviously last year's prizing was very, very lavish. You had the playmats and you had the ER tunic. I understand not doing that again. I think the EA tunic was definitely, I would say, too much in terms of a prize for an RTN. I mean, it's $1.50 card. It should go out to callings or battle hardens or that kind of thing. I was appreciative because I won 2 of them, obviously. I was very appreciative. But I can understand not putting that kind of thing as a prize for an RTN. What I will say is that there needs to be something else as a flagstone prize for both first and second to encourage people to want those spots beyond just getting the invite for the RTN. Otherwise, I kind of said this about the pro quests, and I said this again, is that we want people playing finals. We need to know what decks are the best. We need those decks to make it to the finals and play off against those decks, because a lot of people who don't have a lot of time to practice use the information from who's winning RTNs to help them get a footing to compete at a pro tour or a calling or something like that. they use that information from people who have practiced a lot to help them bypass, say, 50% of the practice. Now, obviously, it's not ideal, and those people aren't going to do necessarily the best because they're not tuning the deck for the exact meta, they're not getting as many reps, but it gives them a foothold to make a start on a competitive deck because they've seen someone else do well with it. That entirely becomes skewed if those finals aren't being played and those meta decks aren't actually clashing to decide who's the best deck. But of course, the worst roll on for all of this is Living Legend. How the hell can you turn around and tell me that a hero gets Living Legend when we know the finals of those events haven't been played? The entire, and I'm going to go straight out and say it, be a little blunt, but for me, the entire, aside from Starvo, because he got enough points that it didn't matter, but Chain shouldn't have got Living Legend from the last ProQuest. I'm going to go out there and say it. I'm personally happy that he did. I'm happy that Chain is gone. I think his ability was inherently broken in that it just gave you a huge card advantage throughout the game. But he could be fatigued, so there were balances there. But I'm going to go full out and say Chain. We have no way of knowing whether Chain actually should have got Living Legend from the last ProQuest because we know for a fact that a decent chunk of the finals of the last ProQuest were not played out, right? The PTI went to one player, the gold foil went to the other player, they split the prizes, and they walked away happy. We know for a fact that happened, and that is happening at the RTNs as well. People aren't playing finals, they're going home earlier, they're taking the prizes because there isn't a suitable advantage to putting that much time in. Now, you can say, or you can't concede, or you can't rig the top 8, people will do it anyway. Like, they will, and you're either DQing the entire top 8, a store isn't going to do that. Like, no store is going to turn around and DQ the entire top 4 of their event, no matter how much LSS tell them to, or tell the judges to. It's not going to happen, because if they do that, none of those people are coming back to that store for the next event, right? None of those people are buying product from that store. Sorry, oh, you DQ'd me from the top 4 and everyone else in the top 4 for working out how we could all go home 2 hours earlier. Okay, I'm never coming back here. Like, it just doesn't work that way. So, in reality, we've got this situation, and there's no real way to fix it, because even if there's a good price of first and second could just say, I want this one, do you also want that one? But at least for the advantage of, if both players say, no, I want that prize, then both players are, okay, we're playing for it then, right? So at least if there is a difference between first and second, there is an incentive for first and second to play off. Sometimes. You're not going to get a situation where they have to play off every time. It just doesn't work that way, just because people are lazy and they want to go, they want to leave. But, you know, it is a situation where, you know, you have to give some incentive. There has to be some sort of gradient, get those people in. And it's really difficult because when you're basing your entire rotation system, this is the whole discussion for another day, is Living Legend good or bad? Personally, I think it's great. I think the heroes that win retiring is really good. But if you're basing your entire rotation system on a simple premise, which is that the heroes that are winning the events get rotated out, you need to have a pretty solid idea that those heroes are actually winning the events and not just getting the win because the other player didn't want the prize or was happy to take a gold foil instead of a PTI. Like, you have to be able to figure out that data. Now, there is an easy way to solve a little bit of this, which is that, okay, at the ProQuest it works fairly easily, right? You basically have to let the PTI roll down. The PTI rolls down, there's no incentive for me to fight you for the PTI. You have nothing to... This is very important, right? It's not a bribe. If we're splitting the prizes, then we're splitting the prizes because, you know, because I want one and you want the other, right? And we're not bribing, we're just agreeing a different resolution, right? But if you can't give me the ProQuest, right? If the ProQuest only goes to the person who, like, in the top cut who says, I'm going to that tournament, then, you know, you can't necessarily give me the Pro Tour invite if you're not going to that event. And I imagine it will be a reasonably big community faux pas to say, I'll just take it even though I know I can't go to stop you from having it. So generally, if you made the PTI pass down, and that if first place wasn't going, they didn't get it, then people would play off for the gold foil more, because as the first place player, you don't have anything to offer me in second place to stop me playing off for the gold foil, because I know that I can get the PTI anyway, because I know you're not going. Now, obviously, there's going to be people who abuse that to say, oh, well, I'll definitely take it, and then obviously don't go. But in the main, you're taking away a particular way that the prizes get split to encourage more games happening. In RTNs, you just have to make a gradient. You have to make a pinnacle prize that people want, like a mat or an EA tunic. It doesn't need to be that expensive, but, something. And then you need to have a runner-up prize that is different from the other prizes of the top 8. Because remember that second place gets a fire or a dromai. 7th place gets a fire or a dromai, or 8th place gets the same. If there's nothing for second, there's no incentive for making it past the top 4, because once you've made the top 4, you've already got your invite, right? It's that simple. You need to give people incentives to play. What did I say the last topic for the day was going to be? Uprising design. We're actually not going to get into that today. I'm sorry for everyone who was listening with the hopes of getting into that. The episode has already gone on long enough, and I do just want to split it there. So 30 minutes on growth rates and 15 minutes on RTNs. We will be coming back to Uprising design. There's a big discussion that needs to happen on heroes in Uprising and whether they're too linear or not, whether the set's just designed, like how solvable those decks are and how quickly they are to solve. And it's a discussion I will have by myself, but I'm also trying to put together a little bit of a roundtable of other content creators who I know like to talk about design issues, to talk about Uprising design. So if you know anyone who's interested in that, or you think someone might be interested, let them know that I'm looking. I'll let them know that I'm looking. I've already reached out to 1 or 2 who've just been like, do you have time for this? Obviously, it's a bit tricky if they're in America and I'm not. But, hopefully I can get something sorted, as I think it'll be a really interesting topic to talk about. I think there's a lot of questions that Uprising makes me ask about what the intention is for heroes in terms of how solvable their decks are and how focused their deck lists are supposed to be. And also just how flexible they're supposed to be as well in terms of playstyle. It seems like a lot of the earlier heroes were designed to be a lot more flexible. The Uprising heroes seem to be designed to be very, very straightforward play strategies. So, I think there's a lot of things to explore there that I'd really like to explore. As always, thank you for listening. If you are still listening, I know a certain chunk of you do actually make it to 45 minutes, and I am really appreciative to those of you that do. If you have made it this long and you haven't subscribed or liked the video, please do that. I really do appreciate the subscriptions and, of course, the likes that really help me with the YouTube algorithm. If you regularly enjoy my content and you want more access to me, Patreon is the way to do that. I am regularly in my Discord server talking to Patreons. I send them pretty much a list of every single draft that I ever do, as well as tournament reports and deck lists that I'm playing in events and things like that. Thing is, an unrefined tournament list isn't a big deal, but once I get sideboards and things like that, it does start to become a lot more valuable to them. And I do sort of do that once I've got a refined list sort of going. So yeah, that's kind of it. That's kind of where we are right now. So have a good one, and I will speak to you all soon.